Afternoon. What an incredible conversation with Melissa and John. And I'd like you all to give yourselves a round of applause for surviving the first day of Milken Institute Global Conference 2025. I promised the audience that they would get a rousing round of applause, and so I think I delivered on that. We gather today at a moment when the American economy is being asked to do something it has rarely done well. Grow in a way that includes, sustains, and repairs. That's not just a question of GDP, it's a question of design, of who has power, who gets to build, and whose futures are banked on. In his book, Evicted, Matthew Desmond reminds us that poverty isn't just the absence of income, it's the result of policy. And capital in all its forms is one of the most powerful tools for shaping that policy, not through just what it funds, but through what it chooses to value. The truth is, no single form of capital can carry the burden of a more inclusive economy alone. Not public dollars, not private investment, not philanthropy, not even community will. But even when those forces are aligned, not just coordinated, but committed, we've seen what's possible. We see it when pension plans like CalSTRS begin rethinking risk and reward. But even when we zoom out further, we're reminded that some of the most iconic American innovations, the ones that reshaped global industries and national identity, were built on public-private alignment. The Transcontinental Railroad, financed by government, land grants, and private capital, didn't just connect the coasts, it redefined commerce. The interstate highway system, launched by federal investment but realized with state and local coordination, rewrote the geography of American life. Even Silicon Valley, often hailed as purely private triumphant, was powered early on by government defense contracts, university labs, and public investment in human capital. These weren't accidents, they were choices. Strategic generational choices that understood capital was not just a tool for growth, but as a lever for national vision. As Toni Morrison once said, definitions belong to the definers, not the defined. Today we have a chance to revisit those definitions, to not just ask what capital is, but what and who it's for. We're joined by some incredible leaders who are not only moving capital, but reshaping its purpose. Starting on my left, Wale Adeyemo, former Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, David Hall, Managing Partner at Rise to the Rest Seed Fund, Cassandra, CEO of CalSTRS, Linnea Roberts, founder and CEO of Gingerbread Capital, and Jim Shelton, CEO of Blue Meridian Partners. I'm grateful to be in conversation with them. I'm going to begin with a big question, and I'll start with Wale Adeyemo on my left. What is inclusive growth? Do you believe in it, and how does your sector have a role in it?
Well, thank you for having me, and it's great to see everybody in the room here. And I think the way that I've thought about this is that as America, we have to find ways to unlock the unrealized potential of communities that have been left out and left behind, be they in rural areas or areas that have been traditionally redlined. And this is not only about advancing the cause of our highest ideals that are found in our Constitution, but it is really about our economic success. When you look at a country where unemployment's at 4% and agree or disagree with the immigration policy, it's going to be hard to find people to do jobs. You need to invest in the communities where people who are not currently looking for jobs are able to find them. You want to unlock the potential of these people in order to make sure that you can grow the economy, because it's not only good for them, but it's good for the United States. So inclusive capital is really based around the idea that if we unlock the unrealized potential in these communities, it puts us in a position where those individuals do better, but we all do better because of it.
Wonderful. I'm going to go to David. David, you've spent your time at Revolution. You really grew up there over the course of your career. And you talk about this idea of building ecosystems, right? That it's not possible to just make one investment without thinking about how to do that kind of across the country and specifically in regions. And so I want to hear your perspective on that and how you think about inclusive growth.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's great to be here as well. Couple things to just to baseline, right? When you think about early stage venture capital, 75% of all venture capital goes to 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts. And so when you think about that, not only does it leave rural areas, it leaves Chicago behind, right? And so I think that there are real opportunities for us to think about the broadening, the capitalizing the eye of inclusive to really include, Phoenix, Chicago, Miami, New Orleans, all of these are great, huge cities that pump out thousands of citizens every year, either through just organic growth or through the university systems where people go to Tulane or Ohio State. And a lot of that growth then, a lot of that brain drain starts to happen when you see people, I remember when I was a senior in high school, they all said, well, where are you going for college? Because you're not going to stay around here. And that's happened in time and time again. And so the way that we think about inclusive growth and the way that we think about investing is how do we take these ecosystems, prepare them, and help counsel them to be more startup friendly, more innovation friendly, so that they can sustain the jobs of the future and not just necessarily have to wallow in the greatness of the jobs of the past.
Cassandra, I'm going to turn to you. You all have approximately $350 billion of assets under management at CalSTRS. Tell us how you all think about sustainable practice that can contribute to long-term growth.
Well, I'd like to start a little bit of background on CalSTRS. We've been in existence for 110 years, and we're a mature system, meaning that we pay out more benefits than we are receiving in contributions. We pay out $19.2 billion a year and receive contributions of about $16 billion. So we're paying $1.5 billion a month in contributions, which means that we're heavily reliant on our investment returns and how we diversify the portfolio to ensure that 7% assumption to make that gap up. So we are diversification is the primary key to making sure that we can fill that gap. We manage our portfolio. 55% is public markets and 45% is private markets. We're always looking for opportunities to provide opportunities for emerging managers in the industry to bring in more newer types of investments and partnerships that aren't generally able to access capital from us. So between CalPERS and CalSTRS, we also put on a Catalyst event every year and have emerging managers come and have access to discussions with our investment management staff. So we're always looking to evaluate where we can continue to diversify in the industry to bring opportunities not only for value for the organization, but opportunities for those who are seeking partnerships with us.
Thank you so much. Linnea, you play an incredible role as a family office investor, both through your family office and through Gingerbread. And so would love to get the perspective from you is what is the role of a family office in this moment?
Sure. Again, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Troy, for you talked in your preamble about just the role of this ecosystem of public and private funding and partnership and policy, and so I really see the value and, quite honestly, the privilege of a family office is to be the pointy edge of the spear. So the level of autonomy that we have, we don't have LPs outside telling us what to do. We can make very specific goals and bets. And in our case, we choose to fund women founders and co-founders, and we also fund women fund managers. But what I really saw is that we did not lack opportunities to invest in. We lacked other funders. And so what I am very, very focused on is that over the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a $35 trillion plus transfer of wealth from the hands of, on average, white men into the hands of women. And that is an immense opportunity. And so I always say, tell me something terrible that happened when a woman had more money. And I still can't think of anything. And then when I think about, maybe I'll find something. But then I also think about when less than 2% of venture funding today, it still goes to women founders, and much less than 1% goes to Black founders. That's what gives me my fire every morning. And so listening to John and talking, I think this is a time to double down. And I think this is the time where you can make very good investments and still do the right thing at the same time. And so I am not confused about that at all.
I think it's powerful to have these various perspectives on the stage: philanthropic, pension, venture, government. Jim, I want to turn to you. You spent both your life in philanthropy and also in government. And Blue Meridian makes big bets, right? Take us through your role at Blue Meridian, how you think about making those big bets, and how you all think about inclusive growth.
Sure. So I think it's worth noting that our first bias as humans is that a definition of brilliance is we agree. So John was here. He's brilliant. I don't need to say what he said again. The reality is that we have the opportunity in our sector to invest in organizations and institutions that change people's lives. And the reality is that the way that our capital market works in the social sector is we have not been actually putting out capital in ways that allow them to do their very best work, to work at scale, to do transformation. And so in this particular moment, I think it's really important. Blue Meridian is a platform that allows high net worth individuals and foundations to pool capital to make large scale investments. Our scaling investments will range from anywhere from $50 to $100+ million. Our earlier stage investments start out with 10 with the assumption that they will go to $50 to $100 million. And that is a gap that exists in the space. The reality, though, is that we will never be enough to fill the gap that government is leaving behind right now. And so where I think that I want to build on John's point is, in this particular moment in time, not only do we have to recognize that we need to lean in, but it is going to be both a moment for transformation. The only way, with the kinds of reductions in federal funding that we're going to see, organizations survive, governments to actually realign to be able to support and benefit the people who need the most, is if we actually lean all the way into the transformation moment that has to happen. And that's not just supporting organizations to do what they were doing before, it's giving them money and expertise and other things they might need to actually figure out what comes next. The other thing is I want us to recognize the moment that we're in, because the reality is that economic mobility in this country has been falling since the 40s across races, right? After the Great Recession, 50% of the jobs went to 3% of the counties. So when those people in the other parts of the country say opportunity is happening for some people, not just us, they're telling the truth. They just maybe not know exactly who's benefiting and how, right? Each of these things mean that we wind up with cities around the country where you can have a high growth city and be one of the lowest mobility cities in the country, as was the case the first time that Raj Chetty put out his list, and again, the same time this time. So this notion that we actually have to be much more intentional about how we weave together the private sector, the public sector, and then use philanthropy as a catalyst so that we can actually bridge the gap is more important than ever. And the last thing I'll say before I let others get back in is, it is especially important because if none of this other stuff that happened in the policy front, artificial intelligence is changing the way we think about how every organization is going to work, how people are going to be employed, and what kind of skills they need. People think about that in terms of the job loss. I keep thinking about the people who've been excluded, right? I spent much of my career in the education space, and we never really figured out how to deliver high-quality education at scale to everyone who deserves it. And that's everyone, by the way. For the first time, though, lack of education and lack of access to the high technical skills does not have to be a barrier to creating an enterprise that can actually scale and create a tremendous amount of wealth. Of course, everyone should be educated, but all of a sudden, people who have great ideas can get them done, don't need other people, don't need the kind of expertise they had to have before, but they'll still be able to be successful. We're not thinking about that kind of inclusion, where people actually get to create real wealth as opposed to just get better paying jobs.
Yeah. I want to turn it back to Wally. Up until about 100 and some-ish days ago.
I had a job.
You had a job.
Yeah.
You had a job. Yeah. And it's a big job. It's a big job at a big department. But I'm not sure it's clear to maybe the public and those who are watching online what exactly that job entailed, and how you thought about braiding together right? Various forms of capital to solve big problems. And so take us through that.
Yeah, so my job, I was the Deputy Treasury Secretary, and I was Chief Operating Officer, but what I was in charge of was implementation. And we inherited from the Trump administration what I thought was a great set of policies around delivering capital at a historic level to CDFIs and minority-owned banks in the country. $12 billion of capital approved in their last package from that administration. We had to execute it. And what we found was that in executing this money going into these financial institutions was while it capitalized them beyond their wildest dreams, they lacked liquidity. And what we did was we built a coalition with the biggest companies in the country, everything from the Googles of the world to the Bank of Americas of the world, who all agreed to take some of their cash and to put it into these community development financial institutions to help them get the liquidity they needed. But that's where we started. It started a conversation amongst these private sector firms, which were joined by philanthropy, and a number of philanthropies were at the table because they allowed us to do some of the catalytic work that was needed to not only invest in providing them with liquidity, which was in some ways easy, but thinking about how do we upgrade their technology at these institutions? What do we do in terms of human capital? And once we started talking about CDFIs, we started thinking, are there things we can do on supply chains and small businesses as well to try and upgrade these communities? Because ultimately for these big businesses around the table in this coalition, these weren't just philanthropic work, but it was work in the communities where they did business, work for their customers, and we built out what was a network of solutions that helped to drive economic growth in these communities, be they urban communities that have been left out before or rural communities. And what it spoke to was this idea that partnerships. Ultimately, the way that we solve problems in this country from the very beginning to today is in partnership with the private sector, with the public sector, but also with philanthropy, which is a huge advantage we have in the United States that most other countries don't have, and that we underutilize because we don't marry them all together. And the thing that I think John said, which I think we don't appreciate enough, is that philanthropy is able to take risks at a level that, frankly, government and the private sector can't. But when they come together, you can create the kind of capital stacks that help you accelerate the type of growth you want in these communities.
Very good. And I want to go back to you, Cassandra. Take us a little bit through your thought process on how you think about asset allocation to optimize your returns, right, as a quasi-governmental entity.
Again, well, 55% of our asset is in the public market, so we're in the indexes. So that's where we get the biggest return for the buck. But we're really trying to go into private markets and look at opportunities there. We're looking at private credit and opportunities in these emerging areas of energy and diversification and all sorts of other areas that are going to be coming into the investing arena. Just like one of my panel members said, we're really looking at opportunities to lean in to these emerging categories of investment. So we're excited about those returns that we are trying to get our 7% with.
Awesome. I want to go both you, David, and to you, Linnea, thinking through both the venture capital ecosystem, right? You all are playing from two different kinds of perspectives. David, you all went on a road show, right? A bus tour, if you will, all around the country, thinking about the kinds of communities to invest in. And Linnea, you have a mandate specifically for women, right? I want to hear from both of you why your specific mandate is so important in this moment, and why it may be more important in the last 100 days or so.
Yeah, so one of the most surprising things on the face of it, which won't sound surprising once I say it, that has been part of our big sort of wake-up call for the last 100 days. Over the $150 billion or so venture capital that was invested before the election, 15% of it, only 15% of it, went to states that were won by the president. So 85%, of course, went to Massachusetts and California, but 15% Texas, 15% Florida, Ohio, 15% the Dakotas. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of innovation that's happening. That's a lot of firsthand touching farming, touching energy, touching things that happen on the Canadian border, on the southern border. That's a lot of innovation that's happening, and it's missing that early stage capital. It's those innovators have to get on planes or buses or trains or whatever to get to those ecosystems of innovation. And so one of the things that we consistently see and advocate is how do we take public money, how do we take private money, how do we take philanthropic money and help build out some of that infrastructure so that if you're an entrepreneur that is graduated from high school, or you're an entrepreneur that's graduated from LSU, and you walk out and say, I want to start a business, and I want to do something in a domain that's relevant to, manufacturing if I'm in Detroit, how do I do it? Where do I go get the tools and the connectivity, that network density that happens at coffee shops all around the Bay Area, but it just doesn't happen in Alabama. It doesn't happen at the levels that it should to help continue to spur the innovation. And so one of the things that we've seen on these bus tours is this hunger for that. And so it is a plea for public, and I think in true deference, I do think that the federal government with things like SSBCI work has been really instructive in helping to funnel that pipeline of capital into states and let states sort of build the infrastructure and make the direct investments that they need. But I think that we this is a moment in time where we've got to go further and keep our foot on the accelerator. So I'm really excited to continue to see that wave of innovation happen and sort of matriculate down into the places that's been so starved of the capital that starts to sort of ignite this innovation.
I think what you're doing at Milken is helping with this. IIE is, for example, helping to drive that innovation in places where they just have lacked venture capital and all this capital in the past. So the question is, how do we get more private sector funding and to join things like SSBCI in order to grow that venture capital in communities that frankly have talent, but in lots of ways lack opportunity?
We heard, just to give a little more context to SSBCI, the State Small Business Credit Initiative, about $10 billion that sits at Treasury, which you were responsible for implementing in your time there. And then IIE, the Initiative for Inclusive Entrepreneurship. We have some partners who are in the room who have joined us. It's a partnership that's designed to help catalyze those dollars out of Treasury with dollars from philanthropy, including dollars from the MacArthur Foundation. So thank you so much for that. And I'll turn to Linnea. I want to hear a little bit about your mandate. And then, Jim, I want to turn to you, thinking through, you talked about this idea of creating jobs and access for industry. So, Linnea, let's go to you.
So our mandate is around women founders and women fund managers. But that being said, it takes a village and it takes a lot of good men to get this work done. So we have many women that have male co-founders, and it's not tokenism. They're real people doing real work. So and we love it. But I think it's an incredibly important time. So women start businesses at a faster rate than men do. And I just came from a lunch where there were 100 women in the room, and I cannot tell you how many CEOs of pension funds were in the room. Women are very, very good risk managers. I wonder why. And so I just see it as our role is to really try and connect those dots. And so while we make direct investments into companies, we're an LP in probably close to 40 different funds, all with female GPs or men of color. The missing piece is that capital side and getting people energized around the investments. And so we're at this critical time where women have started some very, very cool businesses across themes that are really, really important. So just look at what's going on in women's sports. Okay, we now have funds specifically to invest in women's sports. Women's health care. A lot of women's health care has just been fundamentally ignored for a very long time in terms of women of reproductive age, women of menopausal age, and then women as consumers. When women are making 85% of consuming decisions and 90% of healthcare decisions, they're bound to come up with some decent ideas around what needs to change. And so we just think it's this incredible time. And when 98% of the market is going one way, I think that's an arbitrage.
Yep.
Awesome. Jim, economic incentives, hiring locally, sector, industry, you believe in this concept of making sure that the valedictorian doesn't end up getting a job at Walmart, or getting a job at McDonald's. Talk us through how you're thinking about that so you don't just have economic growth, but economic mobility.
Sure, and so let me break it into a couple of pieces. Number one, there's always three parts to this ecosystem, right? In every community, you have jobs that are low wage, low benefit, and there's some of them they're not going anywhere. You have jobs that are entry jobs and they actually have pathways and they actually can lead to good wages. And then you have people who may be in jobs that are good today, but things are changing and they need to make a transition. Most communities don't actually have a discipline around how to think about that. And in particular, there are not very specific policies that are working to make sure that people can make the transitions at the points that matter. So what does that mean? It means that oftentimes economic development happens on one side of the mayor's office or the governor's office, even the chambers and others gather, and economic pathways to opportunity happen someplace else. The workforce development programs may be aware of what's happening over here, but they are not connected to it. So the question becomes, can you actually build ecosystems in places where you are intentional both about what are the jobs that are growing in the community and doing so in a way not only that thinks about like, this happens to grow well, but what are the skills that I have in my community? What are the ways that I can most quickly bridge people from the job that they have today to the job that they can be ready for most quickly in order to keep going? What are the pathways into jobs that are good starter jobs that allow people to move forward more rapidly? And then how do we actually create the conditions for those jobs that are going to be here and part of our economy that typically don't pay well so that those people can afford to thrive as well? Like our care workers is a great example of this, which is overly disproportionately women and women of color in particular, where the economics flow through is very tricky, right? And when you raise the wages for care, you also increase the cost of care. So we have to think about the ways that we actually work together across sectors to create an environment where those workers can actually thrive and everyone can get what they need. The last thing I want to say on this is that employers oftentimes are left out of the opportunity conversation. They are highly incented to find great talent. They will find the most efficient pathway to that talent. And unless we actually create strategies and resources that allow them to access folks who have historically been excluded in ways that are efficient and responsible for them as folks who have a fiduciary responsibility, then in fact, they will use the corporate social responsibility dollars, but never turn on the full engine of the enterprise to figure out how we pull in people who actually ought to be a part of it from the beginning. I'm looking out and seeing Michael Ellison from CodePath, who is actually really working to try and rewire this right now, specifically on the technology path side. So those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about. And I said that was the last thing. The last thing I really will say is we can think about this nationally, but it all happens in places. That's where economies are built. That's where people figure out the jobs, whether it's public sector or private sector. Those pathways then have to be tied to the institutions that are in those communities for the folks that are there to benefit.
I want to be provocative here and say that maybe not somebody in this room, but there's certainly somebody watching online who will watch this panel at some point and say, I hear what you're saying. It sounds fantastic. You all sound like you're doing incredible work. It's big, it's scalable, it's your heart's in the right place, you have the great data, but it's not working, sure. Right? There is some disconnect between what we're talking about in this room and what we're doing and the impact that it's having on people. And I want to hear from each of you, and you can go in whatever order you want to go in, why it's not working, what we've got so massively wrong, Jim, to your point, since the 1940s, that we're going in the wrong direction, that America in that time period has had unbelievable GDP growth, but simultaneously has had below average, if not abysmal, economic mobility.
I think what Jim said mattered, which is scale and partnerships haven't happened. Because when you think about it, in order to solve these problems, even in communities, you've got to get to some level of scale, and you have to have a partnership. And often what you will have is philanthropy and maybe government working together, but then you leave the private sector out of the conversation. And ultimately, the place where the jobs are going to take place is in those private sector locations. That's why I think what we did with the Economic Opportunity Coalition made so much sense. And ultimately, if we're going, right now, on the quiet sidelines of Milken, everybody's talking about, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do in the environment where there's so much uncertainty. But if each one of us, including the private sector, were to say that I'm going to pick local communities where I operate, and I'm going to invest and double down in those local communities, and I'm going to do it side by side with those governments and with philanthropy, That's how you make change happen in these communities. Like, that's the type of scale we need in this moment. The federal government, there's no way that we can make up for the federal resources that are going away. But in some way, what the opportunity set is now is for us to launch experiments that will inform when there is an opportunity for the federal government to step in, for it to look at those experiments, what has worked and what hasn't worked. We've not figured out workforce development in America. We're very bad at it at the federal level. There are lots of opportunities here for us to experiment at local and community levels that we can take. If the private sector is willing to step in with philanthropy and with local government, I think we can get there. But I think you're right, that ultimately we have not solved this problem from the 1940s on in this country. And the only way we're going to do it is if we're willing to all dive in. And it can't just be philanthropy. It can't just be government. It has to be the private sector as well.
I think one of the things that we tried, right, in the wake of George Floyd's murder was this rush of capital into communities of color, into entrepreneurs of color, into fund managers of color. But it was often a check. That check was often attached to some type of either concessionary expectation or attached to some sort of limited termed mandate. And I think that you're seeing the effect of some of that one time only capital start to run its course as the market is starting to readjust. And so I think I think one big part is to acknowledge that wasn't just a flash in the pan, and that those companies, like every company, is going to need a little bit longer hold time, a little bit more support, a little bit more investment dollar to get to that next milestone. And I think it's incumbent on private investors to recognize that. I think it's incumbent on the capital allocators who invest in funds like mine to acknowledge that. And I think it's incumbent for us to have these real honest conversations with our entrepreneurs, particularly our women entrepreneurs, our entrepreneurs of color, that like the idea of being relegated to a concessionary box, either with the types of contracts that you're getting from the Fortune 1000 companies or the types of box that you're having to check to receive specific grants or funding, is not going to necessarily be that permanent funding or that longer term, more consistent funding that you'll need to get to those next level of milestones. So we had an example. It just the tides changed of how that investment dollar would flow necessarily into a lot of those types of entrepreneurs.
And I'd have to agree with Wally. I think that scale and cooperation hasn't occurred to the degree that it needs to. And scale being the biggest part for us, we have to look at everything through a fiduciary lens. We have to meet an investment assumption to pay the benefits for our teachers. And unless that scale occurs, we won't be able to be putting capital into those opportunities. So I think it's really important that cooperation has to exist for scale to get created. So that's where I think that there's opportunity there.
And David, I would just pick on something that you said, that there were a lot of funds that were set up and funded specifically because they were managers of color or women managers, and they were set over in these separate sidecars. And I'm not sure that they did anyone a lot of service. And until funding women and men and women of color becomes part of the mainstream system, I think it's also a size issue. So the typical fund started by a woman is less than $200 million. Most large institutions have $50 million minimums of what they'll invest. So the entire fund, in some cases, is less than their minimum. So it just wipes out basically the bulk of capital that is flowing through our capital engine. And so we need these fund managers to go from their first-time $25 million fund to a $75 million fund to a $200 million fund. But I think we also need to take a hard look at the institutional limits that are set in our status quo financial system and say, okay, does it make sense to have a minimum investment of $50 million? Can I do this as part of the fund without completely compromising? That will take courage and working with your LPs to say this is going to be a part of this investing, as opposed to we've got this little sidecar over here, and that's where we're going to fund women and black managers. And I think I think it's become like the gig is up. That's not working.
Yeah. Cassandra, have you all thought about that, right? That those minimum check sizes, or have you all reconsidered, or from a policy changing perspective, any of those changes?
It's something that we're always talking about. That's why we're trying to evaluate how to bring more. I don't even like the word emerging managers, because these people they're senior, they're tenured, and they're very professional. So I don't like that term. But we are thinking about that. But as an institutional investor, a large organization, we also have to think about the cost of managing smaller investment relationships with bigger investment relationships, because we have to get that gap. And to manage a $50 million and $1 billion, it's the same amount of management responsibility with a lot less return. So it's trying to figure out how do you balance that and create opportunities to help them scale up to get to the size that we can make it worth the
And I would say, like, I understand that, and I understand the efficiency, and that's why I think the role of the family office, with $10 trillion sitting in family offices in the United States, that's a lot of capital that can get deployed that is not beholden to LP agreements, that there's a lot more flexibility. And so I really call on family offices to help us be that wedge. And then once you get the wedge, then you get the FOMO. Okay, and you get the wedge, you get the returns, then you get the FOMO. And then the institutions kind of say, oh, what are we missing?
Is there a gap between the family office and the institutional investor in terms of that needs to be filled? And I think about this, David, in some of our conversations leading up to this, where you'll do great work and there's almost a fall off of investment opportunities in Series A, Series B, Series C for some of the companies that you all have thought about. So take me through how you're thinking about that, or what needs to be filled in that way.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the hardest thing for an early stage entrepreneur is to be a little bit successful, because they've proven the first couple of milestones. They've gotten this great product to market. They've gotten early customers, but now they need, the $10 million round to go out and scale and go hire a full sales team and go hire a deep product team. And for first-time entrepreneurs, for often women entrepreneurs, for entrepreneurs of color, that's really hard. For entrepreneurs in underrepresented geographies, that's really hard. And that capital gap of institutional dollars that's willing to take risks on those types of entrepreneurs, perhaps sometimes even in those types of industries, because sometimes it is an industry tackling menopause, or it is an industry tackling, black women's hair care. And those are billion-dollar industries, but just so out of the norm of the typical Silicon Valley VC's investment committee and investment perspective, there are gaps. And so continuing to find, and look, there are entrepreneurs, there are investor entrepreneurs that are willing to stand up funds and go knock on doors, buy family offices and buy other capital allocators to get those $50 million funds to invest in those types of businesses. But it's a pipeline issue. It's still a challenge. There are still fundamental barriers, Troy, to the issues that you're talking about. And everybody's trying, but it's not enough, and it still needs more support and needs more nurturing.
Jim, you look like you're itching to say something.
Oh, I mean, if you're going to talk about what didn't work, there are probably two things I want to say that are a little depressing, and then one hopefully be a little more hopeful. So. A lot of us know Raj Chetty's work that looked at economic mobility. In that first study, a little bit further back, it was really clear. He said, what would have, and for those who don't know the numbers, in the 1940s, you had a 90% chance of doing better than your parents. By 1985, it had gotten to be a 50-50 chance. And he said, what could have changed it? And first he said, growth. Growth is always the answer. He tried growth. The growth that we had right after World War II took it from 50%, maybe 60% would have done better. He said, what did take it to 80% people still doing better than their parents would have done was if we distributed corporate profits the way we did in the 1940s. Wages, benefits, taxes, and shareholder distributions. So no, people don't like to have that conversation, but that's just what the model shows, that if we wanted to address the 2/3 of the problem, we made the decisions in public and private policy that actually that led to the biggest declines in economic mobility. The second thing I would say, given my background in education, is that we have failed the promise. And we failed the promise on two fronts. One is to really figure out how we actually transform our education and training system so they prepare people for the next generation of work. But in particular, I want to focus on, we broke our promise to the people that we made when we changed industries. Like we've talked about it. We did NAFTA. We told people the jobs were going to move. We told them we were going to train them for the new knowledge economy, and we left them behind. We said we were going to make the move on clean energy, and people are still waiting to be trained. That broken promise not only broke the promise in terms of economic mobility, but it made people angry, and we're paying for it right now. The third thing, though, is that where I think the opportunity is that what everyone has talked about is we've never really brought all the sectors together. But it's not about collaboration. It is about building an infrastructure that actually can allow us to see where the jobs are, where they're growing, what the skills are that people have, and how to actually train people as quickly as possible to gain those things. That is a new kind of education system. And we need to not only invest in that infrastructure, meaning public dollars. We're not going to get there off of private companies trying to figure this out on their own. We need to invest the way we do in medicine and in defense, because there's nothing more important than our human capital. We've never made that investment. Make that investment, and then we have to ecosystem and regional ecosystem, build the infrastructure out so it actually works for everybody there. That's going to take philanthropy and public dollars, and most importantly, the private sector to sign up for being on the other side. We've never done that.
I think the most interesting thing that's happening now is that in many ways AI can do to white-collar work what automation did to blue-collar work. And unless we figure out how to do this now, we'll be in a place where that same promise that felt broken at the turn of the 21st century will feel broken over the next decade. So I think it is we have a moment now where we need to focus in on how do we train people for the jobs that are coming rather than the jobs they have today.
Wally is an unbiased actor in this. I think many people online, many people in the room want to understand what we're building towards, right? Like what could be lost over the next 4 years, over the next 8 years, over the next 12 years, that the four people on your left, right, are going to have to be responsible for kind of bridging together, covering for, thinking through, reimagining. And so maybe paint us a picture of the power of the Treasury and like what can be done, and anything you want to share there.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I worry most about, there's a lot of things I worry about, but the thing I worry most about is human capital. And the secret sauce to America is the fact that we have the best human capital around the world. And we've not invested in it evenly, which I think is a problem that we have to address. But we're at a point where even that uneven investment is now being pulled back from. And the thing that we can do within this group, and I think within society, is try to get right this idea of how does the various sectors in the country who benefit tremendously from having the strong infrastructure behind human capital transform and rethink the way that we do this, because even though this is a challenging moment, it is a real opportunity for us to think differently about how do we build a system that works better for everyone. Because the system we have today, while it's produced great results for the overall economy and at the macro, there have been, as we've said, communities of color, women, people who live in rural America have not had the same opportunities of those people who live on the coast. So there is an opportunity now for us to rethink that system in a way. The challenge, of course, is we're going to have less federal resources to do it, which will mean that we're going to have to focus on the place that matters most to people, which is their local community. And I think getting us as philanthropy, as cities and states, but also the private sector to focus more at the local level, I think is a good thing for us to do. And ultimately, while we're all paying attention to what's happening in terms of federal policy, I think what's happening in technology probably is the bigger trend that's going to have the bigger impact on people's lives over the next 70 years. And we have to make sure that we're finding ways to address that, or we're going to end up in a place where there are going to be more people dissatisfied ultimately with not only what's happening in this country, but around the world.
Awesome. I want to turn to the questions that we have from our audience. A few of them have come in, but I want to encourage you all on the QR code that's behind me to take those in. I want to take this one. We are speaking from the institutional side, how to get worker voice. What about unions? What about having lower return expectations? And I'll lob that up to anybody who wants to take it.
I could say again that we have to look at everything through a fiduciary lens, and of course we take all things into consideration, like human capital management and labor and those aspects as well. So we are definitely engage with our investment partners on issues that rise to the level of concern, or the unions bring issues to us. We're good partners with everybody that has an interest, a stakeholder that has an interest in what we do, and listen and engage with them to try to resolve any issues that we can within the responsibility that we can. Sometimes we can't because we're a limited partner, have very little control, or if any control, about what's happening in the situation that they're in. So, but the fiduciary lens and the risk evaluation is the biggest thing that we have to look at.
Okay.
I think Jim hit on this point, though. I think when you look at the capital stack available to opportunity, making sure that capital stack's risk is matched with the individual discrete opportunity, because each CalSTRS has a different cost of capital than somebody like me that has external limited partners, than somebody working with a family office, than the nonprofit sector. All of us have different costs of capital, and so if we realign that cost of capital to better adjust to the investment that's being made, we're not having to ask for lower returns. Whoever asked the question, we're able to take the kind of return that we're looking for, and be more aggressive at pursuing those types of projects that will yield that type of return, so that it's not seen as a lower return by somebody like me, but it's seen like as an appropriate return and a great ROI on the investment that was made. And so I think being more thoughtful about how that capital stack should look for a for-profit business, for a nonprofit social enterprise, for a base level community service, like all of those have required investment and have a predetermined ROI that needs to be calculated, and then the supplier of that capital has to be willing to take that return. And obviously the supplier of capital of last resort should be, in my opinion, the government, right? Because they're able to take the longest term view on things. But I think we're going to have a real honest conversation about how that capital stack associates risk to the right types of opportunity.
Another question, how do you think about intermediating financial vehicles that can wedge between family investment and institutional investments, and how can those vehicles work and work in place? And so I imagine fund of funds, various kinds of structures that wedge between those. Jim, I saw you nod your head. Linnea, maybe going to two of you.
Well, I was just going to, because I think it actually marries with what David was just talking about, right? Which is that, and the only place I would differ with you is, in an ideal world, government is that player. And in a world where there's politics, government is not, and I'm not saying people playing politics. I'm saying decision makers worry about politics, and so they are not the most risk-taking. And in fact, philanthropists and people who have a lot more control should be able to take some of that off the table to make it less risky for somebody who has those other factors to think about to jump in. The key is that whenever you're looking at a place, and we can actually see some great examples of this. So I just got back from visiting Tulsa, where several things have happened that are really powerful. One, you have a large philanthropist there, George Kaiser Family Foundation, that's decided to invest in the community. And they were doing great work on helping young children, but they realized that if they didn't do more to actually create an inclusive economy, it wouldn't actually, to what end? And so they invested in a number of things, but in particular, they invested to help with the application for a tech hub, which attracted new dollars, public dollars, $50 million, to the local community. And in doing so, they were able to invest in the community college and others to support talent pipelines. And they were able to provide some capital as a buffer to allow for juice returns from folks who wanted to invest in the traditional capital markets. that kind of capital stack in a local community can unlock industry. Similar thing, though, is also true for almost every market in the country is actually suffering right now that has growth is suffering from housing issues. And so you can do the same thing to unlock housing with the capital stack so that people can afford to actually live near their jobs, again, solving part of the economic growth problem. All of these things are things that can be run through local intermediaries or national intermediaries that have a strong enough local presence to understand exactly what's going on and bring together the partnerships that we've all talked about throughout the panel.
And I would just say, you mentioned fund of funds, which I think is a terrific vehicle that can kind of sit in between some of these levels. But I think also there are so many discrete family offices, and so I've been spending a lot of time talking to family management offices. So offices that manage, tens, hundreds of family offices. So much like what Blue Meridian does in terms of directing philanthropic dollars, you can get some scale and some collective power. So we partner a lot with some other high net worth women that are focused on similar things to what we do, like Pivotal Ventures and Ingeborg. And we have found that to be incredibly helpful. So you don't have just like this, sky just with these tiny little dots. You can start stitching some of these pieces together. And if you can collectively speak for bigger dollars, then that helps. But, we've got a ways to go.
And quite literally is the reason we exist.
Yeah.
Right. The ability to bring together multiple families and have them co-invest, not only leveraging the expertise that we're able to bring together, but also allowing them each to take even less risk because they're leveraged against others. Like that's a way that we can actually deploy lots more capital. I could probably put 3-5 times X the amount of capital through our platform that we have today with just a little bit more resource if we're focused on the right issues, and we are.
In the 5 or so minutes that we have left, I want to hear what happens when we get it right, right? What are some successes that you all are really proud of? And I'll give you about a minute each to kind of give us a perspective or an example of, hey, this is somebody I partnered with. I know you talked a little bit about EOC. You talked about what you're doing with Pivotal Ventures. So we'd love to hear from you all a little bit of hope at the end of what seems to be some challenging times. We can start with Wilder.
Oh, I don't know. So I think from my standpoint, it has really been this, even though the thing that I did last was think about not only the U.S. economy, but the global economy, the places where I saw the most success were in local communities, where I had a chance to travel with Senator Crapo, who doesn't agree with me on politics, but the thing he does agree with me on is the idea that we need to invest in local communities. And we went together to Idaho to visit a state where the banking sector there doesn't serve the vast majority of the state because they live in rural areas. But it's the CDFI population that serves those state serves many of his constituents. We got a chance to meet with those CDFIs whose lives have been not only changed by the money the federal government put in, but the fact that philanthropy and the private sector came along to create the liquidity they needed to lend, to create small businesses. And you see economies growing up in places like that, but the same thing is happening in the place I lived before I was in D.C., the south side of Chicago, where you've seen that money. So you're seeing the idea that in these local communities, when you get together with the private sector, philanthropy, and the federal government, you have the ability to make change happen. That means that small businesses get the loans that they need, affordable housing projects get built, and ultimately that's the thing that gives me hope that when we get that mix right and these different actors come together, be it the state government, local government, and private sector and philanthropy, you have the ability to make change in the lives of real people. So that's what's giving me hope at the moment.
I'm an investor. I've invested in over 200 companies, and the narratives of the founders that I work with just bring me so much inspiration. I had a founder who we invested in during the pandemic, and that was its whole bag of bolts to do that. But this founder came to us a couple years ago and just was like, "I'm ready to give it up. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska. Like, this is just too hard. we introduced him. He's a veteran. We introduced him to a couple of other folks to try to peer coach him out of it. You know, we made some suggestions around getting professional coaches and perhaps if there was mental health support that was needed, like gather all of those resources. And I'm so proud because a couple of weeks ago, he closed on a new round of capital, $11 million of fresh financing for him and his business, which doesn't seem like a lot, but like one of the largest investments that has hit, you know, Omaha's a weird thing given Berkshire Hathaway, but one of the largest private tech investments that's been raised in a while there. And it just was just renewed to hear that like the stick-to-itness of founders solving really hard problems. This guy's helping people, helping to ensure high workers' comp policy. So people who are building bridges and building roads and washing windows, like helping those people find better insurance for their small businesses. So just those narratives, and I've got dozens like that just give me hope and really make it a great day to go to work to hear those stories.
Sandra?
And I know I've spoken a lot about being a large institutional investor and the work that we do from that scale. But just to bring it home a little bit, we have 1 million members. In that million membership, we have 450 members. They all live a long time. 450 members that are over 100 years old receiving a retirement benefit. Our teachers live a really long time. They don't participate. They don't participate in Social Security. We are their only income if they don't have anything else. So we really take our responsibility seriously. But I guess to your question is, you know, whether it be a large investor like us or smaller investors, there are so many opportunities that we see on the horizon. And I would say, just as my panelist said, lean into those opportunities and see where you can gain some momentum in the things that are going to be coming up into the horizon, whether it be energy, AI, and the energy that's going to require to power the AI. There's a lot of things that are going to be coming up, so I would be looking towards those opportunities.
For me, I get a lot of inspiration from just the power of the underestimated, and it fuels me every day. And when I talk to our founders, what they're most excited about, what I hear a lot from our founders is like, I want to be successful because I can't wait to invest in the next business. And so I do think you begin to see the flywheel start to go. And we've had a prolonged period where there have not been a lot of exits over the last 10 years. And if that logjam starts to clear, I have every bit of confidence that the founders we've invested in, if they're successful, will actually continue to put money back into the system. People create wealth through equity. And equity in their homes, equity in themselves, and equity in their investments. And there just haven't been a lot of opportunities. So I'm super excited to really drive equity into just more areas of our population.
I think as John said, if you're in philanthropy and you're not inspired by the founders that you fund, and it's importantly, the beneficiaries that they serve, and the courage that they show every day, and the resilience that they show every day, and the ingenuity that they show every day, then something's wrong with you. I though find myself right now holding on to a very particular thing that early in our place-based investing work, it was actually right at the beginning of COVID, we placed investments in communities all across the country, but we wound up with 2 in Kentucky, one in Louisville, Kentucky, and one in Berea, Kentucky. And for those who don't know, Berea, it's Appalachia, big Trump country. And the way our place-based works is we say, look, life has changed over the course of a life from birth all the way through to thriving adulthood. Those who know call it cradle to career. These folks had never actually done work together. So we bring them together and everybody's got the same framework and everyone is talking about their work. And they realize in the conversation they want the same things for their kids and they are actually doing the same work in their different communities. And then they decided that they would partner together to go to the state to ask for money because they had never done anything together. And the state, in hearing their requests, gave them double because they had never seen them come together to do anything. So when I think about the world that we live in today and the rhetoric, and I think about what happens when people actually get together and figure out that we actually want the same things for our kids, that makes me really hopeful.
And I'll jump on that because I think everybody misses this, but today in the United States Senate, there are 14 Republicans and 14 Democrats led by Crapo and Warner who have formed a community investment caucus. They're the reason we got the $12 billion for CDFIs. They're the reason that SSBCI got funded. So even though the rhetoric, to Jim's point, is bad, there are still people who are doing good work. And I think the thing that, for the people who are in this room, I want to thank you for the good work you're doing. But for the people who are watching, unless we lean in and we crowd in, you're not going to be able to pull in private capital. You're not going to be able to get in the federal government to come back into these spaces. So you make me hopeful also, all of you in this room. So thank you so much for joining us today.
I started with the Toni Morrison quote. I'll end with one. You are your own stories. You are your own stories. I want to thank you for your contributions today and you all's contributions to the room. Thank you so much.